How are we doing? Doing well? Did you get some sausage? Did you get some drinks?
Sure.
Feeling good? I just want to say I'm really honored to be here this evening. Thank you so much to the organizers and the other speakers. I learned a lot about snapshots, about the way HelloFresh solves problems. And I'm here to talk to you today about something that's coming up in React that will solve a lot of the problems that we have where I work. To begin, a little bit about myself. My name is Tejas. That is pronounced like contagious if English is your first language. That's the best way to do it. It is an unusual name, and so I thought I'll give you a little bit of a learning device. If English is not your first language, and this word is also weird, like my name, just call me Heinrich or something. I'll respond, like if you look in my general direction. Day to day, I work at a startup here in Berlin called Kontiam. And what we do is we build apps with React and TypeScript that interact with large sets of data, things like machine learning and AI, in order to help our customers make better decisions. You talked about cognitive overload, right? We help that. Really high level, what that means is if you call like customer support for someone and they're using our tools, they'll know, oh, it's this person. He's calling like for the 8th time. He's probably upset. Let's give him something for free, right? We help our customers make better operational decisions. That's essentially what we do. But why do I bring that up? Well, because we work with a lot of data, like a lot. In one of our apps, at any given time, we show the results of a query returning anywhere between 16 and 18 million rows, right? And so we need a way to show this to a user in a way that makes sense, in a way that is intelligible, in a way that can help them make decisions. When working with a lot of data like this, performance is kind of important, would you agree? And so we need a way to really streamline the way we get data to our users. And so the working title of this talk is this. Suspense Deep Dive is a talk I just gave the organizers here. But Streaming React for Faster User Interface is what I'm calling it. And you know, we'll talk a little bit more about what streaming actually means. But I think we should start with understanding the problem space we're working in. I've thought long and hard about how to express the problem that we're trying to solve, the problem that we're talking about. And you know, do I use words? Do I use graphics? How do I express that? And I think my best effort to outline the problem is, I mean, it's we're underground. I'm just kidding, that is the problem, right? We have so many spinners, and in some cases, there's a lot of spinners that really just get removed really quickly. Like on some applications, you have 3, 4, 5, 6 spinners, and you see them for kind of just half a second, right? And why do they need to be there? On the other hand, you have some spinners that are there for minutes. And me, as a developer, I'm familiar with a keyboard shortcut, Command-Option-I. Or in Windows, F12 in Chrome, right? And what I'll do is I'll open up the dev tools and I'll check, did something go wrong? It's taking a long time. I think we can do better here. And so that's kind of what we'll talk about today. I think the problem can be expressed in really 2 ways. There's a higher level problem, we'll call that the problem in the air. And there's a lower level problem that we work with in code, we'll call it the problem on the ground. The problem on the air, the way I see it, is, I mean, ultimately we all just want faster UIs. How many of you want faster UIs? Right, we're living in an age, we're living in the 2018, man. Like we need fast user interfaces. And me as an engineer, I want to give my users a nice user experience. Right? I want 60 frames per second. I want time from server to client to be quick. But really also as a user, I just like to get my stuff done. So if I'm booking tickets, booking a hotel, maybe trying to book a table for date night, right? I want it to be fluid. I need to get it done, and I'd like it to be snappy. Number 2, we don't really consider slow networks, and I think today is a perfect example because we're underground. I have some demos, and I hope it works out. We'll see. But humble confession, this is unfortunately, in many cases, the last thing I think about. And I think that needs to change because, I mean, we live here in Berlin, and advanced and we have 100 megabits per second, but our apps need to work everywhere. Yeah, in some places, you'd be surprised, some places people trade software on USB sticks because the internet's so bad. How amazing would it be if we're able to give them experiences online that work, that abstract away the need for transferring data on disks in the 21st century. Number 3, code bases grow. And with JavaScript, this isn't really a problem because we have beautiful mechanisms, right? We have dynamic import, we're able to code split, we're able to lazy load. So your code base could be 1 million files. It's probably a sign something's wrong, but you can have it, and it's fine. You just load what you need. But when your code base grows, if you're using a React app, the likelihood that your computations grow is quite high. As your application becomes more advanced, your application will need to fetch more data. How many of you have React apps with data fetching? Yeah. I mean, that's why we have backends, that's why we have DBs, and that's why applications are applications. And so with that, even if you use code splitting and dynamic import and all of these things, what's going to happen is at some point you'll need to optimize. The problem on the ground is similar. We basically just have really low performance in some cases, especially when you're dealing with large sets of data, very complex component trees. Performance can suffer. You don't get that buttery 60 frames per second. You also, currently in React, don't really have control over the way your data is being fetched. You kind of just go through this flow of, okay, I have a component did not, I'm going to get my data, and then in my render method, I'll check the state, am I loading? Show a spinner. Do I have data? Show the components, right? That's a very natural way of doing things. In fact, there's libraries that abstract this away. I mean, we have one at Contiamo. There's in the Apollo client. There's a lot of things that abstract this away, but ultimately, that's kind of the flow. And I'm wondering if we can do better here. And lastly, in today's React, render and fetch are coupled a bit. Slava just talked about this import cascade. That's basically it. We'll talk more about the current status quo in React, but that is definitely a ground level problem that I think can be helped. And so I was thinking about how can we improve performance? How can our apps seem more fluid? And I was led to think about a powerful solution that currently exists. Right? This landed in React 16. Sasha Aiken did a great talk about this, where React will render on the server and send chunks of the rendered tree as it becomes available. So how many of you server render? Wow, that's it? That's pretty sad. Sorry. I'd love to talk more about why. Anyway, but we also don't server render a lot because they're meant to be client-side applications. Regardless, if you server render, you will know that there's 4 ways to do it on the server. And more than that, there's also libraries. How many of you use Next.js? 2 guys. Next.js is a really helpful tool belt around server rendering and code splitting. If you server render, as I said, there's 4 ways to do it. We'll talk about 2, right? There's 2 ways. One is to render your app to a string. And so on the server side, you take your JSX, and React will turn it into an HTML string, send it over to the client in one round trip, and then the client gets this chunk of HTML, it's not even a chunk, this huge payload of HTML, and then the browser has to paint, has to parse, etc. Those things are very much an O of N type complexity. The longer the text body is, the more time you're going to need. With stream rendering, React will render where it can and pipe chunks to the browser. And browsers have an inbuilt streaming HTML parser that will basically paint the things as they become available. Visually, what that looks like is like this. This is from an article on the Zeit blog from Spectrum, which is an excellent discussion platform. And they were able to really optimize their application by switching from rendering to a string to rendering to a stream. You can see there the time to first byte is significantly lower. Also the time to first meaningful paint. These are really valuable metrics. And the reason for that is because instead of rendering all the HTML, transferring the HTML, and then painting and doing browser things on the browser side, uses the streaming mechanism. So I was thinking, I'd like that, right? How many of you would actually just like a streamlined experience where you go on the web and you're just like, oh wow, okay, things are just working. I don't see spinners. Could you imagine a day without spinners? I don't see spinners. It's like the website knows me, right? That's just incredible. And so before we proceed, I'd like to actually talk about what I mean by streaming. I've run this talk by many people in preparing for it, and most of them have said to me, what do you mean by streaming? Because there's a lot of names. There's Node.js streams, there's HTML streams in the browser, there's video, right? You could go on, and so I'm here to make things a little bit more complicated and add one more definition to streaming. I'm kidding, I'm not going to do that. For only the purposes of this talk, I've thought about what streaming should mean, and I've thought about expressing it, and this is my definition of streaming for the purposes of this talk, right? A user interface that flows like a stream, providing a fluid experience to the end user. Right? If you've ever seen a stream, it's very seldom, it's very rare that a stream is stop, start, stop, right? It's gravity, then work that way. And so I want a kind of application that is streamed, it literally flows seamlessly. Is that possible? I'd like to think so. Now, in order to have that work, we already looked at the problem on the ground a little bit, where React has this way of rendering and then fetching and rendering and then fetching. And so I think in order to enable this to some extent, we need to talk about data fetching. What we'll do is we'll look at data fetching on the client side, we'll look at data fetching on the server side, and then we'll look at data fetching in the future with Suspense on the client and on the server. This is going to change the API a little bit. Before we get to the demos, I'll say this a few times through the talk because it is very important and I need you to hear me. The APIs are experimental. Yeah? It's not released. It might change. Proceed with caution. My purpose is not to say, go use Suspense right now, but my purpose is to say, get excited about it because it's going to make your apps very performant. So let's take a look at the status quo with React apps on the client side. So currently, this is what we have, right? Your component renders. This is, well, I'm not sure this is currently today's React because there's two phases here. There's render and commit. That's actually async React. And so how it works is React will render your tree, and then when it has its own tree, its virtual DOM tree essentially, it will commit that. It will flush that to the DOM. Now, in today's React, this happens in one step. In the future, that'll happen in two. And that's really important for breaking in a sense, the coupling between CPU and I/O. Regardless, currently, what React will do is it will render your components, and you have a shell. If the children then require data, the children need to fetch. It'll render them, and it'll be, oh, okay, I need to fetch. It'll fetch, and then it'll put that on the DOM, and then its children will need data on the component mounts, and then it will fetch again, and it's a cycle of render, fetch, render, fetch, render, fetch. Does that sound like streaming? I don't think so. It's not streaming so much as staccato, right? It's stop, start, stop, start. That is the status quo on the client. I've prepared a demo to illustrate my point. I grew up watching and playing Pokemon. Any Pokemon fans in the house? Nice. Don't be ashamed, man. Who wants to? I just couldn't get into Pokemon Go. So I tell you this because my demo is a Pokédex. Love Pokédex. Now, and the reason I did this really is one, to make my points, but two, because there's an amazing public API for Pokédex. Blew my mind. And so let's exit out of the slides and let's pop on over here to browser world. And what we'll do is I'll load up my little demo. Let's go localhost 3000. And so spinner, 3 spinners, unload! That happened instantly. So the way the render fetch, can you see that in this example? So what happens is render, fetch, and then finally the moves, render, fetch. Now that's not streamlined, All right, that's not. And so what's happening here essentially is that it loads the list, gets the first item for the list, gets the details for the first item of the list, fetches the moves for the details of the first item of the list. There's 3 requests happening, and that is a little bit uncomfortable to use. I would like, and this is the point of my talk, so pay attention, I would like to have control over when I show stuff to the user. That's what I want, right? I want control to say, wait until X is ready, then show it. This will reduce the spinners. And so I could wish to just show everything once the list, the detail, and the moves are ready. I could wish to just show the list when it's ready, because the details I don't really care, I just want the list. Maybe I want to click something else on load. Currently, you don't have that in React. If we look at the code, now/app. If we look at the code, I mean, this is your standard, you see that? It's your standard React app. So in render, I just show my list. And so this one does data fetching. So let's look at this. So I have an initial state, which is really about data fetching. This isn't the state of the, in a sense, it's a philosophical debate. And the state literally just describes data fetching. On mount, I'm going to get data, and that's my get data method. It's just a fetch call, nothing fancy, to the wonderful Pokemon API. And then finally, my render method, am I loading? Show a spinner. Do I have data? Show the data, right? That's the code. And look at, I mean, loading and data are not really the same thing, so I have to do a double check. Am I loading? And if I'm not loading, do I have data? And then show the data. And the rest of this, I mean, if you've written data fetching apps in React, this should seem fairly idiomatic. This is kind of the pattern. Now, that's a brief look at the status quo on the client in React. Let's go one step further. Talk data fetching on the server side. How many of you use server render? Have you tried data fetching on the server side in React? Doesn't work. Yeah, so I've spoken to a lot of people, and there's no support for it. It's like nothing. This is a very important graphic. Pay attention. This is the status quo on the server for React app. There's render, put it on the DOM, and then you have a shell. Congratulations! I mean, I love this so much, I made a demo of it too. So let's go to port 3001, I believe. That's my app, man! If I'm server, and I intentionally didn't hide it render on the client. This is not running React on the client side at all. At all. So that's what you get if you currently server render in React. Would you agree with me if I say I think we can do better? And so these lead me to the upcoming solution that I'm here to talk to you about tonight. If you've watched Dan Abramov's talk at JSConf Iceland, you would have already seen a little bit of it. It is incredible, and it is a game changer. Man, I spent some time playing with it. I've actually been working with the React team on these slides. It is a definite game changer. Of course, as you all know, the solution is called... That was kind of what you get with Suspense. I control show the title before the subtitle, you see. Keynote does Suspense, no, I'm just kidding. Suspense is first-class data fetching in React. First-class data fetching in React. What does that mean? Suspense gives you superpowers, that's what that means. You're able to now not really care about where in your tree you fetch data. In fact, I didn't show this, I'll show this now. I explicitly, deliberately coded some type of strange data fetching race condition in my Pokedex with current status quo React. So if we look here, what we'll see is, when I change Bulbasaur's moves, watch closely this moves area. So I'll just change. I don't get loading, but that certainly is not the specs for Swords X. In fact, look at that. If I do this really fast, you see that it's a bit of a data race there, and it's unhandled. This is my point. Because we don't have that fine-grained control over data fetching, it's unhandled. With Suspense, any data fetching inside your tree is caught like an exception. It's not an exception. Maybe it's an exception. There's a debate about it. It's caught. And what that means is your app is always aware of its stats. Am I fetching data? Am I not? This also gives you fine-grained control, just like a try-catch block, really. Fine-grained control over where exactly you show a loader or a spinner. That in and of itself is huge. It is really, really huge. And so, I talked about my dream case, which is, what if I just want to show everything once it's available? I can do that now. It also decouples fetching from rendering. So we talked about status quo on the client, fetch, render, fetch, render, fetch, render. The way Suspense works is it will basically render what it can, and if you instruct it to flush that to the DOM, if you say, okay, my data can wait, it's fine, it will do that. If you say, okay, render the parts that you can, wait for data, render those two, and then flush everything at once, it will do that too. It's very intelligent because render and put on DOM are two different steps. Number three, Suspense works with a cache. If you've used the Apollo client, I love the way they handle caching. I think that is an excellent mechanism. Suspense gives you integration with the cache. I think the implementation of the cache can be anything you want it to be. But the way it works with the cache indicates that this cache can be warmed up. So your app could kind of guess where you're going to click and preload stuff. Maybe the app could know your user. And lastly, Suspense gives you true blue isomorphism between client and server. What does that mean? That means you don't change nothing in your code. You just server render magically, you just data fetch. We'll talk more about that later. I mean, currently, if you want to have data fetching on server renders, you can. Next.js gives you a method called getInitialProps, and that gives you access to the request, which you can then reflect on, fetch data, and so on. There's also a workaround called double rendering, where you render on the server and on the client. My point is, these aren't native to React and aren't first-class supported mechanisms. And so I think I've spoken about Suspense enough. I'd like to actually give you a demo. So let's take a look at that same Pokédex, but implemented with Suspense. You can ignore the code on the left for now. Right. Ignore the code on the right for now. Let's just take a look at Suspense and we'll look at some code as well. So, in true fashion, Suspense lives on port 4000. So I have one spinner, and everything's available, and my app just shows. Wow. I mean, I have complete control over this. So let's just use the app. You like Charizard? Who likes Charizard? Okay, well, this guy. So let's choose Charizard right here. Oh, my whole app unmounts. Well, that's not very pleasant. I'm not so sure. So what we can do is, let's look at the Suspense code that's running here first, and then look at how we can improve it. So let's go to the future, / let's go to app.tsx. And so this app, of course, doesn't do any data fetching, but what it does have is, let's see if we can get more space here. No? Hey, Apple, I have some feedback for you. I'm just kidding. So there is a placeholder component, and this is really central to the way Suspense works. Placeholder is very similar to an error boundary, if you've ever used them in React. It will just catch data fetching happening anywhere under it. And so the reason we have this whole spinner at the very top is because I have one placeholder component at the very top, and I've instructed it to wait 0 milliseconds, and anytime there's any data fetching anywhere, show a spinner, which is actually a one div Pokeball. I'm so proud of that. And so that's even if I choose a move here, that isn't a good user experience, right? So what I can do is I can exercise my fine-grained control, and I can remove this. And the default is React will wait 5 seconds before having to flush to the DOM. And so now I have a blank screen, no spinner, that's fine, right? Choose Charmander, I just wait a little bit, but it's okay. Squirtle, so it doesn't unmount, it just waits up to 5 seconds. I think we can do better, because I think actually one of the components takes less time to give me data than both of them together. I think actually I have a theory. I may have practiced this, I'm not sure. The list, I think, that promise resolves quicker. So let's try and show that. What I want to instruct React to do is say, wait 0 milliseconds to show that list, or rather to show a spinner for the list. Wait as long as you have to show the list even, but don't wait for the detail, right? Just go without it. And so we can do that. Let's try and do that right now. So I'll move this guy, coding with one hand and holding a mic with the other is a little bit hard, I apologize. So I moved, now I'm going to get an error. Why? Because this guy here, Pokemon's doing data fetching, but there's no placeholder. This will throw an error. So I'll just duplicate a placeholder. You can have as many as you like. This is kind of going to duplicate what we had before. And so I want to say, placeholder, you can wait for the list, but do not wait for this guy. Just show a spinner, it's fine. So delay ms equals 0. Save. Reload. So you see that we have the list. Isn't that incredible? I have so much. I think that deserves some applause. I have control, man. I have control. I have the list. I show it. This is especially exciting because watch this. Watch this. I choose a move. My whole detail thing unmounts. It's unfun. And the reason for that is we go look at the moves component that does data fetching. Hello. I don't like that feature. This thing here doesn't have a placeholder over it, and so of course the detail is going to unmount. Oh, that's cached. Okay, there you go. That's some of the mechanisms of Suspense that gives you true control over over your user experience, really, where data fetching is concerned. Let's talk a little bit more about it. The Pokemon detail component does data fetching. It fetches, as you can see here, a load Charmander, and it's going to fetch Charmander's information and show me Charmander. Right? How does that work? Let's take a look. So Suspense actually allows you to not need to rely on class-based stateful components. I'm not saying they're evil or anything. I tend to prefer just React.sfcs, right? Just stateless functional components that are just functions, really. And since you're not handling state of loading and do I have data, that makes Suspense really comfortable to work with. And so let's take a look at this component. What you'll notice here is this thing here. I'm importing create resource from something called simple cache provider. The name will change. You can follow the progress on GitHub. Don't get too married to it. The idea of Suspense is, and this is a simple cache implementation. It's nothing fancy. With Suspense, you create a resource. And the resource is something that returns a promise. So inside create resource, what you just pass is any function that returns a promise. You don't pass a promise. You don't pass the return value of a promise. You pass a function that returns a promise. That's really important. And so create resource. This is my function. Here takes an argument Pokemon and returns fetch dot then to JSON. I mean, that's a promise, right? Really simple. And notice that's outside render. That's just that lives somewhere. You can import that. You can do whatever you want. And what I'm going to do here in the component is I'm going to read this resource and give it my cache. And what Suspense is going to do is, if this exists in the cache, give it to the user straight away. If it doesn't, you can invalidate the cache too. If it doesn't, then it's going to actually fetch it. And so we can look, so if I go to Bulbasaur, look at that, that's instant. Because of the cache, I think that's pretty nice. You can also just read from it in render. And Suspense is intelligent enough to know, do I need to fetch it? But really, the problem I'd like to solve is this freaking moves component. Why? Like that. And also look, the initial state of moves, right? The first move is always the default, so even if I click like scratch, I don't like that. That hurts me. It causes me physical pain. I'm a very small man. We can fix it. I think we can fix it. Let's just do a placeholder here. Placeholder. I don't want to wait. You know what? Just give it a 0. 5 seconds, maybe a bit long. I'll give it a fallback. I don't want to use my excellent Pokeball, but I'll just say loading to show you different fallback. This can be a React node, so it doesn't really matter. And I'll of course close it after my, there we go. So now I've disabled automatic reload because I wanted to. So now as you saw, when it loads, it's pretty nice. If I go to Charmander, it's no longer cached because I've done a full reload. But now, if I do this, I can still see Charmander's stuff, right? We still have that problem with the initial state, and that's a little weird. But look, the cache works. I like it. So here's an idea. What if I actually take advantage of the cache? And when you're on a Pokemon, your next logical step is what? You're going to choose a moves. So let me go ahead and help you out as the user. This is how Suspense can create streamlined user interfaces. So far we've already taken some control of the data fetching, right? This is fairly enhanced. Let's go a step further and help prevent this. And I have to say here, there's 100 different ways we can correct this condition of the initial state. I want to focus on state, but it's not related to data fetching. I do have a resource. I'm creating a resource that returns a promise. It's a pattern. So what we're going to do is, let's go to moves, and I don't like this. So what I want to do is, when you visit the Pokemon, immediately get his moves, because I know that's what the user's going to do. And this is how you do it with Suspense. I'm going to put the mic down. Maybe I'll drop it. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's an accident. Hope that wasn't expensive. Let's do inside here. What I'll do is moves. I have the moves already. My resource gave me the moves. Dot for each. I'm going to get the URL, and with the URL, I'm going to do move resource. Thank you. So what I'm going to do here is, so in case you didn't hear, that's wrong. So what I'm going to do is, for each move, get the URL, and then move resource dot preload. Hello. And what I'm going to do is give it my cache and give it the URL, which in this case is the cache key. What that's going to do is, this is where Suspense is really cool. So I'm on my Pokemon, I want to explore the moves. Look at that. Look at that. How many of you think that is streaming? That is incredible. Yes! Look at that. It's beautiful. I no longer have to deal with my initial state. I probably should at some point. Thank you so much. But by and large, I'm able to give my users an incredible experience, and combine that, with caching. You just have. I had Charizard, didn't I? Look at that, Charizard. Wow, wow. I mean, that is incredible. And so, to bring us back, I will say the API will likely change. Proceed with caution, but it is amazing. You probably are asking yourself, okay, how can I play with this? Because it's fun. I've prefaced it enough to say it's experimental. Proceed at your own risk, but here's how you can play with it. What I love about React is that it's just super open source. I hope GitHub's working again. It's extremely open source. And so you go to React, can you see my Excellent. And there's a fixtures. And in fixtures you have unstable async, Suspense. And this README I think is super well documented. So what you want to do is clone the React repo, go to this folder, follow the README, and you'll have a working React app with Suspense. This app is basically just the GitHub profiles of the React core team. You click on them and you get details. It's just like my Pokedex, but for the React team. I shouldn't have said that. And it's, edit that part out. And it's, I'm just kidding, it's fine. And that's how you can play. I think it's really, really, really fun. There's one thing we haven't talked about though, and I wanted to proceed with caution, which is we've looked at data fetching on the client, we've looked at data fetching on the server, and we looked at Suspense on the client, Suspense on the server. I'm almost finished. Let's take a look at server-side Suspense. Because of the way Suspense is implemented, you're able to have data fetching on server-rendered apps. That is just really cool. I built a demo, but I mean, this is especially, it's like proof of concept level, right? Andrew Clark threw it together really quick, and so you really probably shouldn't be using this unless you want to play. Still, regardless, let's take a look at the demo. It lives on port 4001, I believe. And so we have data fetching. Look, watch! This page doesn't appear to be using React because it's using React on the server! How cool is that? I mean, and the cool thing is, I've plugged it into my routing so I can go Charizard. It's going to fetch Charizard and then server render Charizard, man. Come on. What is your favorite? Someone shout out a Pokemon's name.
Bulbasaur.
Someone shout out a different Pokemon's name.
Snorlax.
Snort? My man. Just watch. It's beautiful. This is so beautiful. Server rendered magic. My goal here again is to not have you use this in production. Please don't. But totally get excited. And most importantly, get involved. React is an open source project. It lives on GitHub. This is a link to the issue. which is an umbrella for releasing releasing Suspense rather, you're more than welcome. There's a list of to-dos. Maybe you can contribute something, right? You are part of the team at large. Yeah? And so get excited. I just want to say thank you so much. My name is Tejas Kumar. I'm honored to be here.